So good evening, everybody. It's 7 o'clock, so time to make a start. A very good evening to members and officers who are logged into the website directly, and also to members of the public who may be here or viewing the proceedings on YouTube. I'd like to remind everybody that this meeting is being streamed live on our website and being recorded. The remote meetings are something new to us. Their unfamiliarity and the need to get used to their technical operation means that they are unlikely to go as smoothly as meetings held in person. So I do hope that everyone taking part or observing will bear with us on this. To help us, we've been given guidance on the conduct of remote meetings, and I'd just like to emphasise a few of its points. Hopefully, members are taking part from a place where they won't be disturbed or distracted. When they're not actively participating in the meeting, I would ask members and officers to keep their audio and video turned off. Anyone wishing to speak should type an H in the chat box, and I will call them when it is their turn to speak. We don't use the chat signal at the bottom of the screen there in Teams, because that doesn't operate on everybody's devices and doesn't give us the sequence of events that people have put their hands up. So please remember to use the H in the chat box and not to use the chat box for other things. All questions and contributions must come through me as chair, and please remember to turn on your video and audio when I call on you to speak. Any councillor who has an interest in any item should declare it and keep their audio and video off when it's being considered. They will not be included in any vote on the subject. When it comes to a decision on any of the recommendations or motions before us, I will assume that if no one says that they oppose, everyone will be in agreement. If anyone says that they are opposed, I will ask for a formal vote to be conducted. If we lose live stream on the website, I will adjourn the meeting for 10 minutes and hopefully the problem can be fixed. If it cannot, I will adjourn the meeting until a future date. So I now, if I may, will turn to the agenda. And item 1, attendance and apologies for absence. I pass the meeting to Mr. Mayfield, if I may, who has that list available.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The members showing as being present for this meeting, besides yourself, Councillor Pooley, the other members of the board are Helen Ayres, Nicolette Chambers, Paul Clark, Ian Fuller, Marie Goldman, Simon Goldman, Neil Gulliver, Barry Knight, Rose Moore, Richard Porter, Andrew Sozin, Nora Walsh, Malcolm Watson, Roy Whitehead and Tom Willis. There are other members present who may or may not contribute during the meeting, and they'll introduce themselves when they do. We've had apologies for absence from Councillors Dayton and Galley, and Paul Clark and Malcolm Watson are acting as their substitutes. The officers present are Keith Nicholson, who's the Director of Public Places, Jeremy Potter, Claire Stuckey, Liz Harris-Best and Amy Rayner from Planning Policy. And we're also joined by the one member of the public who's asking a question at this meeting, Andrew Parker. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayfield. Thank you very much for that. If we move on to declarations of interest, all members are reminded that they must disclose any interest they know they have in items of business on the meeting's agenda, and that they must do so at this point on the agenda or as soon as they become aware of the interest. If the interest is disclosable and a disclosable pecuniary interest, they're obliged to notify the monitoring officer within 28 days of the meeting. I will take this opportunity myself. I'm advised that I should declare an interest in agenda item 5, which is the item on which there is a public question, since I have been involved in that situation in the past. And at that point, I will pass the chair to my vice chairman, who will have been elected by then. Are there any other declarations of interest? I'll take that as a no. Thank you very much indeed. So agenda item 3, you have seen in the agenda pack the minutes of the meeting on the 5th of March 2020. Goodness, a lot of water has flown under a lot of bridges since then, hasn't it? So if you've seen those, may I ask that I sign those as a correct record?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 4 is public questions, which I shall read out how that works. Any member of the public may ask a question or make a statement at this point in the meeting, provided that they've been invited to participate and have submitted the question or statement in writing and in advance. Each person has 2 minutes and a minimum of 15 minutes is allowed for public questions and statements, which must be about matters for which the board is responsible. I may disallow a question if it's offensive, substantially the same as another question, or requires disclosure of exempt or confidential information. If the question cannot be answered at the meeting, a written response will be provided after the meeting. Any member of the public who wishes to submit a question or statement to this meeting should have emailed it to the email address which is given in the agenda 24 hours before the start of the meeting. All valid questions and statements are published with the agenda on the website in advance of the start time of this meeting, and we will respond to them here. Those who've submitted a valid question or statement will be entitled to put it in person at the meeting, provided they've indicated that they wish to do so and have submitted an email address to which an invitation to join the meeting and participate in it can be sent. And at this point, I'd like to welcome Mr. Parker, who I know is with us. There has been notice of only one question. Mr. Parker, what I'd like to suggest, as we often do in other meetings where questions are put forward by members of the public, is to invite you to put the question at the appropriate point in the agenda itself, rather than precisely now. So as we get to agenda item 6, which, as I say, I will have to vacate the chair, but the chair will invite you to put your question then. Is that acceptable to you?
Yes.
Thanks very much, Mr. Parker. So item 5 is the appointment of a vice chair. I'll take this opportunity to thank in his absence the work done over the last year by Mark Springett, who, as you know, has stepped down as a councillor of late. I have one nomination for the appointment of vice chair, and that's of Councillor Ian Fuller. Are there any other nominations? In which case, do I have a seconder?
Second.
In which case, may we appoint Ian Fuller as our vice chair?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Welcome to that. And now you immediately step into the hot seat, do you not? As I should stand down because I have declared an item of interest, and you're taking the chair for agenda item 6. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I believe we have a presentation, first of all, for this part of the meeting. Is it Claire Stuckey that's doing it?
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. This is a fairly brief presentation which seeks to summarise what the Strategic Housing and Employment Land Availability Assessment is, why we have reviewed the Strategic Housing and Employment Land Availability Assessment, and what the main changes to the assessment criteria are. The Strategic Housing and Employment Land Availability Assessment, or SHELAA for short, is a desktop assessment of the future supply of land for housing and employment uses. The assessment applies a range of suitability, availability and achievability criteria to determine the deliverability and developability of land. The SHELAA is an evidence-based document which is used to ensure that the Council maintains a 5-year supply of housing land. It will also be used to review the recently adopted local plan. In addition, the SHELAA informs the annual publication of Part 1 of the Brownfield Register. The SHELAA does not determine whether a site should be allocated for development. It is for the development plan to determine which sites are the most suitable to meet the local authority's requirements. The Council is able to demonstrate that it has a 5-year supply of housing land and has recently adopted a new local plan. So why review and publish a new SHELAA? Well, planning policies and decisions need to reflect changes in demand for land. The National Planning Policy Framework requires local authorities to conduct regular reviews of land allocated for development and land availability. Following the development of the new local plan, it was considered prudent to review the assessment procedure and criteria to reflect the policies in the recently adopted local plan and ensure consistency with it. Previously, the assessment provided very little flexibility and focused heavily on whether a site was located in the green belt or not, without further consideration of their suitability in relation to other local plan policies. The new approach assesses sites on a more granular basis, which is also reflected in their scoring. The SHELAA database has now been created in-house, which makes it easier to amend the criteria and generate reports. The output options also offer greater transparency in how a site is scored against each individual criterion and provide summaries of site constraints where applicable. The criteria note in Appendix 1 sets out the suitability, availability and achievability criteria that sites will be assessed against. The main changes include additional suitability criteria to enable assessment against a greater number of local plan policies. New criteria has also been developed to assess economic development. In comparison to previous assessments, this SHELAA assesses a wider range of employment and mixed-use proposals. There has also been minor changes to the assessment of land ownership in the availability criteria. The achievability criteria has not changed, although the achievability element of the assessment that assesses the likely economic viability of site development has been updated using the same methodology as the local plan and viability study, including seal viability review, that was produced for the council to support the new local plan.
Chair, I'm sorry, but nobody can see the slides. Can we interrupt the presentation?
2020 publication. The recommendations in.
Yes, I didn't. Here we go.
Sorry, Chair. I just, Mr. Vice Chair, I just wanted to say that nobody can actually see the slides at the moment, so we could only see the main, the first slide, and it wasn't in slideshow mode. It was just in preview mode. I was wondering if it's possible to adjust the presentation so that we can all see the slides and can watch along at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just try it again from my end. It was playing okay on my screen, so I'll just give that one more go. Thank you.
I'm sorry to be a pain, Chair, but now we can see it, but we can't hear anything.
It's difficult to know what's, whether it's working or not.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. This is a fairly brief presentation which seeks to summarise what the Strategic Housing and Employment Land Availability Assessment is, why we have reviewed the Strategic Housing and Employment Land Availability Assessment, and what the main changes to the assessment criteria are. A Strategic Housing and Employment Land Availability Assessment, or SHELAA for short, is a desktop assessment of the future supply of land for housing and employment uses. The assessment applies a range of suitability, availability and achievability criteria to determine the deliverability and developability of land. The SHELAA is an evidence-based document which is used to ensure that the Council maintains a 5-year supply of housing land. It will also be used to review the recently adopted local plan. In addition, the SHELAA informs the annual publication of Part 1 of the Brownfield Register. The SHELAA does not determine whether a site should be allocated for development. It is for the development plan to determine which sites are the most suitable to meet the local authority's requirements. The Council is able to demonstrate that it has a 5-year supply of housing land and has recently adopted a new local plan. So why review and publish a new SHELAA? Well, planning policies and decisions need to reflect changes in demand for land. The National Planning Policy Framework requires local authorities to conduct regular reviews of land allocated for development and land availability. Following the development of the new local plan, it was considered prudent to review the assessment procedure and criteria to reflect the policies in the recently adopted local plan and ensure consistency with it. Previously, the assessment provided very little flexibility and focused heavily on whether a site was located in the green belt or not, without further consideration of their suitability in relation to other local plan policies. The new approach assesses sites on a more granular basis, which is also reflected in their scoring. The SHELAA database has now been created in-house, which makes it easier to amend the criteria and generate reports. The output options also offer greater transparency in how a site is scored against each individual criterion and provide summaries of site constraints where applicable. The criteria note in Appendix 1 sets out the suitability, availability and achievability criteria that sites will be assessed against. The main changes include additional suitability criteria to enable assessment against a greater number of local plan policies. New criteria has also been developed to assess economic development. In comparison to previous assessments, this SHELAA assesses a wider range of employment and mixed-use proposals. There has also been minor changes to the assessment of land ownership in the availability criteria. The achievability criteria has not changed, although the achievability element of the assessment that assesses the likely economic viability of site development has been updated using the same methodology as the local plan viability study, including SEAL viability review, that was produced for the Council to support the new local plan. In summary, the SHELAA 2020 publication will incorporate a report explaining the methodology and providing statistical summaries from the assessment, a criteria note setting out how each site will be assessed, a viability study reporting the typologies used in the assessment and testing the economic viability of development for each typology, individual site summaries showing each site's performance against the assessment criteria, a list of omitted sites that were submitted but have not been included, specifying the reasons for exclusion, and parish maps showing where each site lies. The recommendations in the report are that members note the changes to the criteria note in the updated SHELAA and the outputs of the 2020 assessment set out in Appendices 1 to 6. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes the presentation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Parker, do you want to put your question now?
Hello.
Hello.
Can you see me?
And hear you, yes.
Brilliant. Okay. Hello, and I hope you have a copy of these comments. My question relates to the SHELAA and in particular to the scoring system used. Under Appendix 3, Site Assessment of the SHELAA, each site is scored according to the suitability criteria. Locality of the development is considered important in that the site achieves a score of 0 under any criteria. The site's overall weighted suitability score will be capped at 3 and would therefore mean that a site will not be placed on Part 1 of the Brownfield Register if it's previously developed land. Under physical criteria, if a site is outside the development boundary, a score of 0 is given. I would like to know why there appears to be a discrepancy with this scoring. All these sites are on previously developed land and their proposed use is for residential. Site reference 18/3 has a suitability score of 3 because the site is outside the defined settlement boundary, which is correct according to the criteria. This site has an overall score of 86 points under suitability. The site reference 18/2 CFS 87, 17/12 have higher suitability score of 2, yet the sites are also outside the development boundary. They also score lower than 86 points under suitability, and 2 of these sites also score 0 for proximity to public transport. Can this be checked, please, as it doesn't seem to be fair? In addition, it appears that greenfield sites are scoring higher than brownfield sites. For example, site reference 17/25 and CFS 24. This seems to be because they are being promoted as mixed use. It is not government policy for housing to be built on. Is it not government policy for housing to be built on previously developed land before looking at greenfield sites? Should the criteria be changed so that if a PDL site achieves a high overall score, even if it's outside the development boundary, it can be considered category 1, especially as some greenfield sites are scoring category 2? Can these matters be addressed before the SHELAA is formally adopted and agreed? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Parker.
Thank you.
I'll hand over to Mr. Potter to answer the question.
Do I mute you?
Thank you very much, and good evening, members. Just as a point of clarification, the presentation that we had was from Ms. Harris-Best rather than Claire Stuckey. Just so I wouldn't want her to just make sure we've got the right person. So, in relation to Mr. Parker's question, well, first of all, as you heard from the presentation, this is a technical base. It isn't a policy document. So it's a technical first sieve of sites and scored in a very high level. So just starting with Mr. Parker's first point about suitability, I want to clarify that there is no discrepancy in the method. The calculation and capping process is quite complex, and it provides a weighted output, which importantly takes into account, and this is really important, it takes into account that the council has just adopted its local plan with a new spatial strategy. So there will be instances where sites may well score relatively highly in certain aspects, but because they are outside of the defined settlement boundaries, or they are contrary to policy in relation to the plan that we adopted last week, they score lower in that regard. In another respect, in terms of the previously developed land that I was talking about, PDL is scored positively over greenfield as part of that overall assessment. So in suitability terms, I'm happy that the scoring and the criteria, there is no discrepancy. In terms of the point that was made in terms of brownfield register, the output of the SHELAA is just one of the considerations to consider with regard to whether a site is included within the brownfield register or not. And this is set out in the regulations, Regulation 4 actually, of the Brownfield Land Register regulations. So there are more criteria rather than just being a category 1 site. Scoring of the other sites, we are checking the coding in the database. As you can see, members, it's quite a long document and a number of outputs that you've got and some quite complex formulae that are going into that. So we are checking that, and we will provide Mr. Parker a written response in regard to some of the detail that he has just gone into. So, I mean, finally, the SHELAA is a living and technical document. It isn't a policy document. So it isn't to be approved or adopted. It's a living document that helps the council assess its land availability assessment at any particular point in time. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, so hopefully, Mr. Parker, you'll get a response, and please come back to us if you've got more questions on that. Okay, I'll now see if other members wish to ask any questions. And first of all, I have Councillor Walsh.
Hi, good evening. Looking through the document, because it's a very comprehensive document, I noticed there are a number of sites that have been identified in Great Baddow, one of which is in the local plan. And as many of these are not in the local plan and are in a green belt area, my question is, how likely is it that these would come forward, and what would the next steps be? As in, how might they be considered if they were to come forward to the local plan at a future time?
Okay, I guess that's back to you, Mr. Potter.
Thank you very much, Councillor Walsh. So at this point in time, this document is a very long list of sites that are being promoted to the council. Now, it far exceeds the capacity of those sites, far exceed what the council actually needs in regard to its housing land supply. So the council has, as all members will be aware, has a 5-year land supply, has an adopted plan, is able to demonstrate that we've got a set of deliverable sites to meet our housing needs. The main purpose of the SHELAA in regard to this council is to provide an evidence base to when the council seeks to review its plan. So at a point, and in the plan it says the first consultation needs to be within 2022, and the council needs to, it's a statutory obligation to review its plan every 5 years. It will then review what sites are available and what strategy the council members wish to employ with its review of its plan, and then we will review what sites are in that basket and look at the opportunities and the scoring of those sites in relation to that first sieve. So, in answer to your question, it is a matter of using those sites in the review of the local plan. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Councillor Porter has a question.
Thank you, Chairman. If I get cut off, it's my end because I keep losing a connection. So I've missed some of what Joan Potter's had to say, but my comment relates to the criteria in Appendix 1. And I realise that SHELAA does not allocate land for future development, but Category 1 is likely to get some form of preference. So my concern relates to how the categories are actually graded. They're graded 0 to 5, irrespective of their individual importance. By way of example, a site is within, if a site is within 2 kilometres of Chelmsford urban area, it scores higher than a site which is within the defined settlement boundary in a parish area. So the question is, should some criteria be graded, say, 0 to 10 and others 0 to 5 and weighted according to importance? That might give a more realistic score in determining which category the land should fit in. I'm not suggesting any changes tonight, and I support the recommendations, but I'm just questioning whether that could be looked at before it comes back to us for the review in 12 months' time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Mr. Potter.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Yeah, I think what's important here is that the SHELAA is the first relatively crude starting point in relation to the journey between a site being acceptable for development and not. So I think what we need to realise is that once we start reviewing sites in relation to the review of the local plan, then the much more detailed criteria that you're talking about, the finer grain criteria, is all applied as part of the sustainability appraisal. So members will be aware last week that we adopted the sustainability appraisal. There is much more detailed framework about proximity to services and facilities, listed buildings, all of that much finer grain detail that would go into determining whether a site is suitable or not. So I think, in answer to your question, I think this is the right level in determining that kind of broader determination of suitability, achievability and deliverability, rather than going into a much more detailed criteria. Thank you.
Thank you. May I ask follow-up? What I should have said at the outcome is that spending a lot of time going through this afternoon, I realised just how much time and effort has gone into production of this document, and I'd like to express my thanks to all involved.
Thank you, Councillor Porter, and I echo those comments. Councillor Paul Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify then, if we're talking about sites of multiple dwellings, it has to be on this SHELAA list to be considered, or does it get excluded? Thank you.
Mr. Potter.
So thank you, Councillor Clark. So in relation to whether it's going to be considered, I assume you mean considered in relation to its inclusion in a future local plan review. It doesn't have to be. What tends to happen is that landowners and promoters of sites will go through this process because essentially it provides the council with its starting point for assessing suitable sites. Representations as part of the local plan review have the same effect. So, for example, in the first round of consultation on the local plan, it may well be that further sites come forward, and then we assess those sites in the same way through the SHELAA to get an accurate baseline. So all sites are assessed together using the same criteria, and then we start bringing those forward and looking at how they apply in terms of sustainability appraisal. So in answer to your question, it doesn't preclude other sites coming in the future for allocation within the local plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? No, it doesn't seem like it. So do we need a proposer for these recommendations? Mr. Mayfield, do we need them to be proposed?
Yes, they need to be formally proposed and seconded, Chair.
Okay, so can I have a proposer, please?
Oh, Councillor Roberts, if you wish.
Thank you. And a seconder?
Yes, me.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Porter. Okay, so that concludes that item. So I'll hand back to the chair.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Am I visible? I noticed one councillor couldn't hear me very clearly at the start of the meeting. May I just check that my voice is clear enough for people?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I shall take that as a yes. And I should take responsibility for briefing my vice chair incorrectly as to who was presenting that presentation at the beginning. My apologies to Liz Best, and thank you for that. So we come to agenda item, the next agenda item, which relates to the consultation response in respect of the proposed Bradwell B power station. Again, we have a presentation, which I believe this time is from Claire Stuckey. So if I may, I will pass over to that.
Good evening, members. I'm Claire Stuckey, a Principal Planning Officer in the Spatial Planning team, leading on the Bradwell B development response. In the presentation, I'll summarise the key proposals of the Stage 1 consultation insofar as they impact on this council's area, and provide a summary of the proposed response, given in detail in Appendix 1 of your covering report. I'll finish by briefly outlining the next steps following the consultation and then give the report recommendation. Bradwell Power Generation Company Limited, or BRB for short, are developing proposals to build a new nuclear power station at Bradwell-on-Sea in Malden. BRB are also proposing additional off-site associated development to support the power station construction within Malden and Chelmsford council areas. The new power station, Bradwell B, will be located adjacent to the former Bradwell A power station, which was decommissioned in 2002. Section 2 of the cover report outlines the scope of the Stage 1 consultation. Some aspects of the proposals are unlikely to be influenced by the consultation because they are driven by technical and safety considerations and government policy. These include the principle of building Bradwell B, the type of nuclear technology to be employed, and the type of associated development needed. Aspects of the proposals which are likely to be influenced as a result of the consultation responses include the approach to managing transport effects, options for areas of search for associated development, and the design of the associated development and mitigation work. Officers have had regard to the consultation scope when preparing the response in Appendix 1. Information in the consultation is based on BRB's current understanding of the main power station site and local area, and their experience with other similar projects, such as Hinkley Point C nuclear power station in Somerset. As BRB develop their proposals, they'll prepare more detailed strategies to understand and help mitigate adverse effects. Where they can, these will be available at later stages of the consultation process. However, for some more complex areas, full details might not be available until the development consent order application. This figure, which is also Appendix 2 of your report, sets out BRB's current view on what information will be provided and when. Section 3 of your report explains that the project development consent order will be assessed against relevant national and local planning policies. These include the overarching National Policy Statement for Energy and the National Policy Statement for Nuclear Power Generation, together with adopted Chelmsford and Malden Council local plans. It should be noted that national planning policy outlines an urgent need for new nuclear power stations and identifies Bradwell B as one of 8 potentially new suitable sites in the UK. Officers have had regard to national and local planning policies when drafting the proposed response. Section 4 of your report gives an overview of the main development site proposals, which will be the location for the main power station plant, as shown in this figure. It will include 2 nuclear power reactors, plant facilities, cooling towers, a new electricity substation provided by National Grid, vehicle parking and access roads. The wider site will also include interim spent fuel and waste storage facilities, marine landing facilities, and temporary construction worker accommodation. The proposed consultation response considers that as Chelmsford City Council does not lie adjacent to the main development site, the consideration of site-specific impacts, such as upon the landscape, historic environment and flood risk, are deferred to the relevant consultees who are more appropriately placed to respond, such as the Environment Agency and Malden District Council. However, in respect to ecology, it is proposed that this council raise concerns about the potential significant negative impact of the development on the Essex Coast designated habitat sites and the lack of detailed studies that any harm can be sufficiently mitigated. In Section 5 of your report, members, there's a summary of the project's transport proposals. These focus on the construction phase of the development, when potential traffic impacts would be at their greatest. The consultation outlines that during the peak power station construction, there could be between 9,000 and 11,000 workers needed on site, and between 500 and 700 two-way HG vehicle movements on average per day, making deliveries to and from the site. BRB's proposed transport strategy focuses on maximising the use of marine and/or rail transport over road transport for moving freight, reducing the distance a construction workforce needs to travel and promoting sustainable modes of travel, and implementing highway improvements or other measures to mitigate residual transport effects of the project to an acceptable level. Specific transport proposals include on-site marine transport facilities to try to deliver at least 50% of the construction materials to the site by sea, freight management facilities to act as HGV holding areas to help regulate the timing and flow of vehicles to the site, temporary worker, park and ride facilities and dedicated direct buses to pick up construction workers from local population centres and railway stations like Southminster and Chelmsford, to reduce worker traffic on local roads closer to the site. An early years in-out routing loop for HGVs between the strategic road network and the main development site to manage HGV movements on local roads. And permanent highway improvement works, including road widening, upgrades, bypasses, and new sections of road. This figure, also Appendix 3 of your report, members, shows the 3 search areas for freight management facilities. These have been identified as they could meet the functional and operational requirements of the project, such as being in locations close to designated HGV routes. Search areas 1 and 2 are in Malden District, east and west of Latchington Village. Search area 3 is in this council's area at the junction of the A130 with the A132. This figure, which is Appendix 4 of your report, shows the 6 search areas for construction worker park and ride sites, again which could meet the operational and functional requirements of the project, such as being close to the strategic highway network to reduce traffic on local roads. BRB anticipate needing 1 large site for around 1,600 spaces in search areas 1A or 1B, and potentially 1 or more smaller facilities, 3 of which, sites 2, 3A and 3B, are in this council's area. BRB are currently undertaking studies to better understand the benefits and disbenefits associated with the search areas for both the park and ride and freight management facilities, and these will inform the selection of their preferred sites and their design for the Stage 2 consultation. This figure shows proposals for the potential in-out routing loop to operate within the early years of the power station construction. It would mean HGVs travelling from the strategic road network to the site by the A414 in Danbury and past Malden, shown as the orange route on this figure, and returning to the strategic highway network by the A132 past Southwood and Ferrers, shown as the blue route. This proposal seeks to minimise the need for 2-way HGV vehicle movements on local roads and could be implemented as part of a construction traffic management plan. During the main construction period for around year 4 onwards, it's proposed HGVs travel to and from the main site from the A130, A132 junction west of Southwood and Ferrers. They would then travel along the A132 and the B1012 around Southwood and Ferrers before travelling along one of 2 main routes. Route 1 is shown in blue and Route 2 is shown in red on this figure. The figure also shows various highways, improvement, widening and bypass options which could be undertaken to accommodate the development traffic on the network east of Southwood and Ferrers. These are shown as dashed red and blue lines and include potential bypasses for the villages of Latchington, Mayland and Steeple. Other than improvements to the B1418 and B1012 junction, shown as a star on this figure, no other specific highway improvements are shown around Southwood and Ferrers, although junction improvements are proposed near the strategic highway network at the roundabouts at Hawk Hill, Rettendon Turnpike and the A130, A132 junction. The consultation indicates that with these improvements, sufficient capacity is likely to be available to mitigate any residual transport effects of the project to an acceptable level. Overall, the proposed response considers that in the absence of published evidence, including traffic modelling, it's not possible for this council to adequately assess all the implications of the proposed development on its area, to rule out significant adverse impacts and to determine whether it's possible to effectively manage and mitigate for these. As such, it proposes that this council raises concerns or objects to a number of the transport proposals, including the early years and peak construction transport strategy, which is considered wholly unsuitable through Danbury and Southwood and Ferrers. The modal split between marine, rail and road transport for freight, which is considered too road dominated. The scope and suitability of highways transport improvements, the suitability of proposed construction freight management facilities and worker park and ride sites, all of which are not evidence-based at this stage. The lack of consideration of the Danbury air quality management area, and the lack of highways interventions identified for Chelmsford City Council's local and strategic highways network, in particular the lack of a bypass around Southwood and Ferrers. The response also urges BRB to make available their additional evidence as quickly as possible and with the input of Chelmsford City Council as a key local stakeholder. Notwithstanding transport concerns and objections, the response does welcome BRB's commitment to work with local stakeholders to identify the highways effects of the project and to understand how adverse impacts can be avoided or mitigated. BRB's commitment to use sustainable modes for construction freight and workers to help reduce traffic on local roads, including a dedicated project bus service from key railway stations, and the principle of worker park and ride sites, and implementation of permanent road and junction improvements to mitigate and manage highways impacts. Section 6 of the report outlines BRB's strategy for jobs and people. The consultation outlines the development could deliver lasting social economic benefits for the region, including increased investment, skills, 3,000 new local jobs, and 1,200 new apprenticeships. BRB's proposals focus on maximising the project's positive economic effects to ensure local people can access the jobs and the benefits Bradwell B could bring, together with understanding any potential adverse effects the project could have so these can be avoided or mitigated. Specific proposals include an employment skills and education strategy to develop the local skills base and support local people into work on the project, an asset skills enhancement and capability fund to support local skills providers deliver appropriate training to support project requirements, linking construction contractors with training providers to provide advanced information on the jobs and skills that will be needed so that training can be carried out in good time, and supply chain team to assist local, regional and UK businesses win contracts to supply goods and services to deliver the project. In terms of measures to mitigate and manage adverse jobs and people impacts, the consultation includes proposals for temporary accommodation next to the main site for around 4,500 workers. This figure shows 3 potential locations discussed in the consultation and would enable thousands of workers to walk or cycle to work, significantly reducing the number of car and bus journeys to the site. Supporting the provision of new local caravan accommodation to provide new homes for workers near the site. Interventions to help minimise impact on the local housing market, including a potential housing fund, which amongst other measures could help bring vacant properties back into use. And on-site facilities for workers such as a health centre and sports facilities, together with the potential for direct additional support for existing services where they're likely to be affected. Overall, the draft response recognises the benefits the development could bring to Chelmsford and welcomes its jobs and people proposals. However, it does raise concerns over the potential impact of an additional workforce on Chelmsford's local housing market, which is not mentioned in the consultation. Therefore, as with other aspects of the proposals, the response urges BRB to make available evidence as quickly as possible and with the input from Chelmsford City Council. The draft response also raises concerns about potential adverse impacts on the implementation of the Chelmsford local plan allocation north of Southwood and Ferrers, including aspirations to create a well-connected and seamless urban extension to the existing town. Whether BRB has adequately considered the cumulative effects of the development, the effectiveness of the consultation during the coronavirus pandemic, and the lack of a strategy to reduce the carbon emissions generated through the different phases of the project. The response also strongly encourages the development as a whole to maximise opportunities to reduce its carbon footprint and support the transition to a zero carbon economy. Section 8 of the report provides the next steps following the Stage 1 consultation, which ends on the 1st of July. These will include the development of preferred proposals, strategies and sites for the project, which will be informed by the consultation responses, evidence base and continued stakeholder engagement. The preferred proposals will be set out in a Stage 2 pre-application consultation, anticipated to be carried out in 2021. This may be supplemented by limited focus stages of further consultation before the submission of the Development Consent Order application in 2022. The proposed recommendation on the front cover of the cover report is for Chelmsford Policy Board to approve the consultation response set out in Appendix 1 and to submit it to Bradwell Power Generation Company Limited before the consultation period expires on the 1st of July 2020. Thank you, members. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Poulter thanked the officers for their great efforts in respect of the previous agenda item, and I'd like to echo those in respect of this one. I certainly feel much better briefed as a result of that presentation and the report to the board than I had so far from the attempts of the power station itself to brief us on various things. And I'm very reassured by the balance of the report and the robust expression of some of the concerns and the emphasis on the need for further consultation and very specific in how that affects us and how we want our views taken into account. So I see that there are a number of people who have raised their hands to talk on this one, and I'm aware also that we have other members of the council here in addition to policy board members who I'm very happy to hear from. And in particular, I know that the cabinet member for sustainable development is with us. Mike McCrory is with us, so I will look out for a hand from him if he wishes to speak. What I'm going to suggest, councillors, if I may, is that I take the hands that I see, maybe three at a time. Some of them may be just making statements rather than asking questions. But if we take three comments or questions and then ask officers to come in and answer some of those, if that's appropriate, and we can take it from there. Is that acceptable to everybody? So I see that Councillor Paul Clark is the first to have raised his hand.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think I was the first, but I'll take the opportunity anyway. I was looking at this afternoon, and what concerns me is the logistics. Obviously, the A132 to the A130 junction is well emphasised in that report. Personally, I don't think it's strong enough. If you consider other factors such as the Lower Thames crossing is due to be completed by 2027. This junction has been under review for improvement since the A130 opened in 2001. There is so much traffic that is being generated from the Dengie developments before Bradwell is even mentioned So therefore, this junction is in need of much improvement just on those criteria alone. And then I see a freight management site slap bang in the middle of it. One can only look in horror at where that is likely to go. I know it's only suggestions, but the words like possibly and potential usually manifest themselves as a suggestion that's taken up when there aren't any alternatives on that map. The map doesn't look like it's up to date anyway, because the part of the site seems to include Runwell Hospital, which actually was knocked down a few years ago, and there's now 600 houses being built there. But the site itself, 2/3 of that site 3A is actually on the green belt as well. And I know it's not a permanent site, but if you're going to put sort of thousands of cars and hundreds of trucks on it, what damage is that going to be doing to the landscape? And that's why I don't think the criticism on the transport and logistics side of it goes far enough. Thank you.
Councillor Clark. I have Councillor Andrew Soshin.
Thank you, Chair. My first comment on page 4 of Appendix 1, paragraph 10, will need an update to reflect that the local plan is approved. I guess the officers probably already picked that up. Point 18, there's a suggestion of more work on rail transport, but I'm particularly strongly feel that it should be amended to say this should not involve unloading freight at Chelmsford Central Station and then transporting that through central Chelmsford and Great Baddow and onward. We're particularly concerned about the effect in Great Baddow, but rather enhancing the branch line to Southminster, where they could drop off stuff at Southminster. I appreciate that that would require a very substantial enhancement, but so I would think of some comment along those lines that could be added if that's possible. And my third point concerns points 20 to 27, and it's something that in another group, Councillor Keith Bentley suggested, of park and ride schemes at Southwood and Ferrers and possibly Malden to reduce the commuter traffic in conflict with the traffic to Bradwell B, and possibly picking up workers for central Chelmsford in the reverse journey to drop them off and then connect up with their proposal to take bus workers to Bradwell. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Soshin. Councillor Marie Goldman, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I wanted to start off by saying a big thank you to officers for the hard work that I know that they have put into this response. We can see the hard work that's gone into it. It's extremely detailed, and I think we are probably in the area, this is probably one of the most detailed responses that's been put together so far by local authorities. So I want to say a big thank you to them for that. I'd like to be on the record as saying that I am opposed to nuclear power, but unfortunately that's not something that we can do anything about right now. So as point 2 of the summary consultation response says, that though in principle we are opposed to reliance on nuclear power, if it's subsidised by the government, we recognise that it is national planning policy that this is going to go ahead. So we do have to work with BRB to try and mitigate some of the issues that are coming up. I note that the circles that they've drawn, which are the search areas for example, the park and rides, are just that they certainly say that they are just search areas. So while they've indicated areas that they're looking in, it does not necessarily mean that they wouldn't necessarily look elsewhere, I imagine. So that's not set in stone. I'm really incredibly disappointed to see that BRB have not paid any attention to our, as it was an emerging local plan and now our adopted local plan. And I think that is disappointing is probably a bit of an understatement from a company that should be a bit more professional I think that some of the transportation issues are, how can I put this politely, bonkers, I think is the way that I would put it, to suggest that many lorries, that many HGV vehicles going through Danbury in particular, and obviously Southwood and Ferrers. I mean, if we talk about Danbury, the roads are simply not suitable for those sort of vehicles, not to mention the pollution that I would expect to see from vehicles like that, and certainly would not want to see anywhere, let alone somewhere like Danbury. So I'm really concerned about that, and certainly something that we need to raise very, very strongly. I do have a concern about the availability of labour in the workforce as a whole. This will be taking place, the development of this will be taking place at a time when there will be other large developments happening. Councillor Clark has already mentioned the Lower Thames Crossing, and there are other big infrastructure projects happening, not just in this country, but elsewhere in Europe as well. And I wonder whether the availability of labour has been considered by BRB, and I wonder if that has been raised with them at all. And finally, I just wanted to say that I am pleased to be able to say that Cabinet and directors will be meeting with BRB. It will be the first time that we've all met with them virtually, of course, in the coming days. And I look forward to having a discussion with them and raising some of these issues. Now, of course, we're putting forward this formal, or hoping, if it's approved this evening, to put forward this formal consultation response. But I look forward to having a proper discussion with them about this, because this has not happened up until now. There have been only kind of cursory discussions with them. So I look forward to having a proper discussion with them. And I've certainly not had any proper dealings with them other than at their launch for a few minutes, when they assured me that the search areas were just indications rather than definite areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coleman. I'm going to pass to Jeremy Potter, if I may now, to respond to some of those points. And there was within that from Councillor Sochin, I think, a suggestion of a very specific additional phrase. Is it Councillor Potter or is it Jeremy Potter or Claire Stuckey who's going to respond?
It will be Claire Stuckey who's responding.
Okay, Claire, thank you very much. All yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members, for your questions and comments. If I start with Councillor Clark, yes, certainly in terms of the traffic impacts, we have tried to stress that significantly within the document, and that's in part why we're really strongly urging the availability of evidence, particularly highways modelling, to be made available to us as soon as possible, and for officers and members of the council to be involved with the scoping and the setting of that highways modelling work as well, so we can inform the production of that. We have tried to emphasise the cumulative impacts and the lack of consideration for those we feel at this stage within the consultation document. In reference to Mr. Clark's point about the Lower Thames Crossing development, we have tried to stress the need for them to consider lots of developments in the wider area, together with those outlined within our local plan and Malden's local plan. In terms of impacts on the openness of the green belt, that is something that we have also mentioned within the response in terms of the search areas for freight management facilities and worker park and ride sites. If I move on to Councillor Sosin, yeah, absolutely. At the time of writing the response and the covering report, we haven't got the local plan adopted, but we can make sure that the response before it is submitted reflects that we now have. In terms of the function of the park and ride sites, it may well be that once their proposals are more refined, we could look at opportunities for benefits for Chelmsford residents in terms of enabling workers to access employment opportunities in Chelmsford City. So that is something that we could explore with BRB going forward. In terms of rail freight, rail could potentially play a role in terms of transporting freight to the site. They're looking in particular at using muster ports, those at Harwich and Felixstowe, for instance, that could then be used to transport freight to the site by sea. They have mentioned within the consultation about the freight rail interchanges, and there is one in Chelmsford city centre. They have made reference to those, and it could be something that we want to touch on, but they don't propose at this stage necessarily to use those for the delivery of freight to Chelmsford, because it would then require HGV movements from the city centre, from the train station to the site. So they haven't specifically mentioned that that is part of their proposals. But if we felt as an authority we just wanted to raise that in the response, that's something that we can look at as officers. In terms of Councillor Goldman's response, the availability of labour, that isn't something that I've come across in the consultation draft. They talk about using a gravity model and their experience with other nuclear power stations that they're working on, such as Hinkley Point C, in terms of the available labour pool. But they haven't specifically made reference to where they feel the majority of the thousands of workers are likely to come from.
Is that it? Thank you very much. Or have you frozen on us? Ah, okay. So Councillor Fuller, I have next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thinking about Hinkley Point C, we can see about the dramatic impact that it is having on the local communities in Somerset. And I was just wondering what powers do actually exist going forward that might prevent certain things from happening. So could as part of the consent order or whatever, could you enforce to stop workers parking in the local villages? Could you stop landlords evicting local people from their properties to accommodate workers at the power station, because they'll be might pay higher rents? Can you give compensation to local employers if they lose their skilled workers to the plant? So are there those powers that we can put in, or someone can put in place? Thank you.
Thank you. And I have Councillor Walsh.
Hi, thank you. Chair, I'd like to express a concern on the potential impact of the development of Bradwell B on the village of Great Baddow. There's the impact of workers living local. Bradwell B workers choose to live in Baddow. I would be concerned about the impact that would have on accommodation, leading to an increase in rent, and the impact on the housing market and increase to house prices, both of which would affect the local residents. Also, there's the impact of additional traffic in Great Baddow, particularly on the Malden Road, if the park and ride is used. And finally, the future use of Sandon Park and Ride and the impact for Baddow residents, should this be used by workers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Roberts, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. I sincerely hope that Councillor Goldman has better luck talking to Bradwell B people as I did with my colleagues down in South Woodham Ferrers, because they talked at us for most of the time. They didn't answer any of the questions we legitimately asked and sent them beforehand. So I wish her and the rest of the executive the best of luck with that. But however, the thing they seem to have missed, and the transport is obviously a great concern to us in South Woodham Ferrers. We are aware of the development that is going to eventually arrive as a result of the local plan and what the local plan contains. There's also, I believe, there should be a mention somewhere in the reply of the emerging South Woodham Ferrers and the Danbury neighbourhood plan, because they are both proposing things that are going to alter the scene in conjunction with the local plan. So whether they should include at least a reference to it. The other thing with the transport is the commuters, and I believe that there is scope to have a park and ride somewhere in one of the vacant gaps on the branch line, the Southminster line, and actually create some form of halt so that it's a temporary halt. They can have a separate train and move the workers in at 8 o'clock in the morning and move them out at 7 o'clock in the evening or whatever the time is, so that they're not going to be travelling into South Woodham Ferrers or to Malden and all other places to catch buses, because buses on the train is adding to the 700 lorries, of course, and you don't get that many people on a bus. So if you're talking of thousands of workers moving in there, that's an awful lot of buses going in at 8 o'clock in the morning. So it's a thing. We also got to remember that South Woodham Ferrers is very close. Well, it's in a coastal protection zone. The RAMS consultation means that they would have to contribute some funds to mitigate the effect on that. And let's talk about junction improvements. Interestingly enough, in the local plan, it says that Countryside or the developer is going to do the same junction improvements. So if they're doing junction improvements for 1,200 houses, by the time they have these lorries on, they'll lead another set of roads. And the option, I think, which is in your report, in the response, for a bypass around the whole development is absolutely correct. But I do believe we should give them a bit of a slap for not even taking notice of the local plan, our local plan, Chelmsford local plan, all the neighbourhood plans, which are in existence and have been around in one form or another for several years. So they must have known that. I would like to see greater use of electric vehicles. I'd like to see the train line used for the transport of heavy goods, because going back many years, not that long ago really, they used to move sand all the way from that part of Essex and take it up to London every night of the week, several hundred tons of it. And why they can't just use it again, because that's what they did then, why can't they do it now? There is a loading bank at Southminster where they could do that. So I believe they need to be considering using the railway, as we mentioned by our previous speaker, and possibly extending it direct to Bradwell, which would even be better still for the local people. So the railway and electric and mitigating transport is really, really a big issue in this part of the Chelmsford area, and of course for the people of Malden, because they're going to be held up with the congestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. I think it's only right that people are expressing some very strong views here about I'm not muted, am I? But expressing some very strong views here in support of some of the comments made in the report about the concerns. And I think this underlines the importance that both the officers and various members are placing on the next stage of the consultation and all the specific responses that can go into that and hopefully be taken into account. But let me pass back to Claire Stuckey at this stage.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I respond first to Councillor Fuller's comments, in terms of powers to prevent other adverse impacts happening, and I think that he talked about compensating employers for the loss of workers, etc., restricting workers from parking on nearby roads close to the site, etc. The consultation document does talk about measures to minimise disruption and impacts on the local area. It doesn't particularly talk about loss of workers, but it does mention things such as a construction workforce travel plan, in which only limited numbers of workers would be allowed to park at the site, and then there would be local controls as well to reduce impact of car parking on nearby roads. So there are some proposals within the consultation document, but they are interested to hear further about local concerns and local issues, with a view to try and accommodate those moving forward as part of the project. So I think that in part answers Councillor Walsh's question about workers parking near the site. In terms of the park and ride, we are mentioning to them that we're disappointed that they don't have a reference at the moment to the existing Chelmsford Park and Ride sites, including the one at Sandon. So that is something that we're raising within the consultation. And we're also raising concerns that we don't feel at this stage that they've adequately assessed all of the wider impacts potentially from the project in terms of transport on Chelmsford's local and strategic network. They go into some detail about potential impacts in places such as Danbury and Southwood and Ferrers, but we would suggest the need to go a bit further in terms of looking at impacts and modelling how those can be overcome and mitigated a bit further afield. In terms of Councillor Roberts' comments, we are asking within the response that BRB have full regard to local policies, both within the adopted plan now, but also emerging neighbourhood plans, and are disappointed that they don't have a reference to those within the consultation. In terms of Councillor Roberts' suggested site, we haven't gone that far within the response. What we would recommend as officers is really seeing the full evidence base first before indicating whether we feel there may be other alternative or preferred sites that need to be looked at. And that's for fear of potentially suggesting something in the absence of evidence that could be more harmful. In terms of impact on habitat sites, that's something that we're strongly concerned about. The power station sits within a really sensitive marine environment. It will need to go through what's called a habitat regulations assessment alongside Natural England, who are the government's advisors for that environment. And we have asked through the consultation that the City Council be involved with that, alongside the Essex Rams partnership. We are encouraging through the consultation the use of electric vehicles wherever possible in terms of the park and ride bus fleet and the buses that are potentially proposed to collect workers from local centres of population and the railway stations. And we are asking BRB to look again at the modal strategy for delivering freight to the site and to potentially explore further the use of rail, potentially along the Southminster branch line. And then in terms of impact and disruption on local communities, particularly South Woodham from the new development and the Bradwell Power Station proposed development, we are asking them and urging them to work very closely with the developers of the land north of Southwood and Ferrers to minimise disruption to local people. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Oh, now I'm getting an echo. If there's anybody got the microphone on, can they make sure that it's switched off? Thank you very much. So I have two more councillors waiting to speak, and then I shall bring this to a close, I think. Councillor Poulter and then Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank officers for a very lengthy and constructive response. I think we can rightly be proud of the behaviour and competence of our officers, particularly on the planning side. Councillor Roberts suggests that we have a rail connection to Bradwell. This seems to overcome a number of the problems that exist with regard to road transport, particularly if the railhead can actually go into the site. It would minimise the need for any extensive road improvements and extensions. But if we are having to have an extension of the road network around Southwood and Ferrers, particularly in the junction with the B1418, and there's a suggestion also that we have a bypass of Southwood and Ferrers. If there is to be a bypass, then that calls into question of where the bypass is going to go. Presumably it's going to go north of the proposed development site, but is it going to go south of the village of Wood and Ferrers, or is it going to cut between Wood and Ferrers and Bicknacker? I don't expect you thought of that, not time to, or have weighed up which is the better route. But if it is to bisect those two villages, then I might have some concerns to raise in the future. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor.
Yes, good evening, Chairman. I'm here in two capacities, as you know, because Councillor Massey was unable to get through, and so he sent a copy of a note to you. It's a very brief one, which I'd like to read out on his behalf. It says, on behalf of the residents of South Woodham Ferrers, we fully support the City Council's response to the Bradwell B proposals, particularly as highlighted in bullet points 21 through 34. The residents of South Woodham Ferrers are extremely concerned at the likely increase in HGV traffic along the A132 and the B1012, alongside the new development proposed within the recently adopted local plan. The A132 is already operating with higher traffic levels than it was designed to accommodate. And there are multiple pedestrian crossings planned along the B1012 to link the new development with the rest of South Woodham Ferrers. Okay, so those are his comments, which I was put into record. My own, my own comments. It's interesting because a lot of people have said much the same thing in different ways, which is that they've ignored Chelmsford. Excuse me. And I think we need to start off our response with a much stronger comment, really, because what they've done, I think, is try to put things down for Malden, which is where planning, permission and so on will go. But actually, of course, nearly everything they're doing affects Chelmsford, Danbury, South Woodham and so on. And we're one of the major cities in the UK, so they're just ignoring us, which I find very depressing to say the least. So should we not start our response by making that point specifically, because that's what Councillor Goldman and others have all said, which is the impact of these proposals. Excuse me. Hoping I'm not going to collapse in parliamentary fashion. The impact of these proposals is particularly difficult for Chelmsford, and therefore we wish to be at the heart of all the negotiations. There are lots of other points made there, and I don't disagree with those and don't want to get involved with the detail of those. But as such, to be ignored and to ignore the neighbourhood plans of the two villages as well, it's quite wrong. The fact that we can't as yet make a sort of breakthrough with them, we need to use our members of parliament. Councillor John Whittingdale, of course, is the member both for Chelmsford and for Malden, so that we have some leverage there. So I'd like to see an opening paragraph which specifically says, you know, why you ignored us. I won't phrase it. The officers will phrase it rather better than I will. But nonetheless, if we don't make that at the beginning, to say all these detailed comments, they'll pick on the detailed comments as people do and sort of pick them all off one way or the other. Yes, I'd like to see the railway extended and all the rest of these things, of course, but they should not be ignoring us. The ignoring of the local plan, which was discussed the other day, is the key one of this. And the new Lower Thames crossing is another one, really. So they're all points that are being made which are vital. And they seem to have written something about 4 or 5 years ago, ignoring everything else. And I think from this council's point of view, we want to make the point that they are ignoring us at their peril, because we believe that we can contribute a great deal to a project that I'm not entirely in favour of myself, but nonetheless, that's not the point. What we have to do is to make sure that they don't pollute the villages around Chelmsford, bring traffic all the wrong places. And if we could strengthen our response, I would be most grateful. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, thank you, Councillor Whitehead. I spoke slightly too soon. I have Councillor Willis who would like to contribute, and then I also have Councillor McCrory, the Cabinet Member for Sustainable Development, also raising his hand. Councillor Willis.
Support the concerns of members with wards nearer to the sites concerned about the traffic issues and the desirability of the use of rail in order to minimise those. And then more widely, the Lib Dems under the coalition were prepared to go along with nuclear power where there was no public subsidy. But I note from the report that spent fuel will be stored on the site long after the new power station's working life. In other words, the bill for dealing with it in the end will be left to future generations and no doubt the public purse. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Willis. Councillor McCrory.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to welcome Councillor Whitehead's remarks, actually. I think that we could be rather more robust in our opening comments, because I think it's pretty plain that they regard this as just being something of almost an inconvenience that they have to consult neighbouring authorities. I know that Malden say that they strongly support the proposal, but I think other authorities look at it somewhat differently. So perhaps we can have a look at that with the opening sentence or two. On a couple of specifics, mention was made of the Brook Street goods yard, and I'd just like to underline that concern there, because that does appear in the actual main document, and I would be most concerned to have these HGVs driving in and out of the centre of Chelmsford, picking up aggregates or any other materials. There are alternatives. The Southminster line has been mentioned. They claim that there are difficulties with Network Rail and so on. Well, these difficulties for such a major project have really got to be overcome. There's also mention about the marine delivery and seaborne barges and so on. It's interesting that down at Wallasey Island, where the land was reclaimed for RSPB reserve, then tons and tons and tons of spoil were bought from the Crossrail project, and it was a planning condition that all that spoil came down the Thames and round to a jetty to Wallasey Island, so that the heavy lorries didn't go through the countryside. Now, I know this isn't a normal planning application, so you can't attach those sorts of conditions, but I think we should really try and push that. Okay, it's got to be carefully managed because of the wildlife of the coast. But I think barges out at sea and then coming back into the long jetty is not beyond. So I think, okay, this is the first stage consultation response. Made it quite clear that we need far more evidence to actually give detail. I would say that it's a pretty robust response, considering some of those stuffs in over the years. But yes, I think if we could perhaps just strengthen the opening sentence or two to sort of register our displeasure. Indeed, when we do meet the person, at least it will be down on the record. So I think that's okay.
Thank you, Councillor McCrory. I'm going to interrupt because your sound is fading in and out, but I think we've heard your response to that very clearly. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So I'll pass it back to Claire Stuckey, if I may, for a minute, and then we'll come back to how the recommendation needs to be addressed in the light of any amendments.
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of Councillor Porter's remarks, firstly, in terms of rail, and I think Councillor Porter was suggesting that we ask BIB to further consider the use of rail and the possible extension of the Southminster line, local branch line. This is covered within the report, and from their initial discussions with Network Rail, they don't feel that it will be viable within the project to actually consider an extension to that branch line without major engineering works. So they think that in terms of timing and cost and viability, that's not something that they feel is a proposal that can necessarily be taken forward, although they don't provide too much evidence on that within the consultation. So again, that's something that we can ask them to provide. In terms of any potential alignment for road bypasses, such as around Southwood and Ferrers, we very much want to see the traffic modelling, the evidence base, and that's for Bradwell B and their consultants to undertake and share with us before we would make any views on specific proposals. And we would be carefully looking to make sure that any preferred options wouldn't have adverse significant impacts for other parts of the city area as well. In terms of Councillor Whitehead's comments, I think some of that was echoed with Councillor McCrory in terms of strengthening the initial part of our consultation response. I mean, again, officers are very happy to do that if that would be helpful in terms of strengthening our position on certain aspects. That's no problem. In terms of Councillor Willis asking us to explore rail further, hopefully I've covered that. We are encouraging BRB to look at sustainable modes for freight and workers as far as possible to minimise impacts on local roads. In terms of the Brook Street Goodyard, yes, I think that would be a good idea, Councillor McCrory, to stress our concerns about having additional HGV vehicles collecting goods delivered to the interchange in the city centre, and then having to negotiate the city centre roads and go out and then onwards to the site. And officers would very much share those concerns. In terms of using barges to deliver freight and goods to the site, they are looking at setting themselves a target of a minimum 50% of all the construction materials to arrive by sea. And within the consultation document, they have options for some marine landing facilities. At the moment, the preferred option within the consultation document assumes delivery of between 2 and 4 barges by vessels each day during the peak construction. Any more, they feel, would have harmful impacts on the very significant habitat protected sites and the wintering birds in particular that use the estuaries for feeding and breeding. So there is a balance to be struck at maximising the potential to deliver freight by sea, as well as ensuring adverse impacts on the internationally, European and national protected sites is done as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And I see that Jeremy Potter would like to come in as well.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I just really wanted to thank members for your contributions tonight, which I think are all really valid and also underpin, I believe, the response that's before you in the report, especially in relation to the fact that during the process of this council preparing its local plan, we've gone through a 7-year process of cooperating, the duty to cooperate, a legal process where we have had to go to pains to consult with many bodies, our local authorities that surround us, all of the statutory bodies, to make sure that they are fully aware of what this council is proposing and giving them the time to enable adequate consultation to take place. So I do echo some of members' frustrations in regard to the way this has been set out. However, we are where we are, and this is happening and we do need to make sure that we, as a council, officers believe that we get that message across. I feel that we can strengthen, in light of some of the messages we've heard tonight, the response, and potentially with your agreement, Chair, we can essentially change that. We've got a bit of time, so it's not until the 1st of July the consultation response needs to go. So maybe a formal response is then delegated to potentially the Director of Sustainable Communities in consultation with potentially the Chair, the Vice Chair and one other. That's a proposal that has worked in the past when we've considered these types of consultation responses. But I'll leave it obviously to you, Chair, to make those kind of decisions. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Potter. And I see Councillor Clark has put his hands up again. I thought that he'd come in already. Is it a new point, Councillor Clark?
It is, thank you, Chairman. Just I've heard several references to the rail network. The line from Southminster to Wickford, as the planning officer clearly pointed out, is a branch line. To expand that, we've been trying to get a dual track on there for years, because I used Wickford Station for 25 years, and I can tell you now it's quite chaotic at the best of times. Then if you add the Crossrail terminus at Shenfield, which is further along that line, if you were going to use rail, you would have to be connecting to the main line between Liverpool Street and Harwich. And we all know what the logistics of that are, but I can assure you that the options on the rail network are very, very limited. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So, if I may just come in and say that what I'm hearing are many views that echo my own, which is of very, very great concern that if this is going to go ahead, and I think there's an awful lot of time that will elapse between now and the next consultation, between then and any action, but if it is going to go ahead, then the impact that it's going to have is going to be very, very long term. Councillor Willis mentioned the question of storage. Everybody's mentioned the difficulty in extending the branch line. But hang on a second. If we're going to make our responses good for Chelmsford here, and we're looking for the best result that we can, we should be very firm in making the plans for this have a long-term beneficial effect, rather than say it's too difficult. And I'm gratified to hear from Claire Stuckey and from Jeremy Potter that the officers share this approach and are very clear that we are going to be very strong as a council in our responses. I would urge parish councils and the South Woodham Town Council to cooperate very fully with our officers, because there is strength in joint approaches, even if the responses are going in separately. I think you can reinforce some of the things that are there to be had. I'm perfectly content with the suggestion that Mr. Potter made that the officers have taken on board some of these comments, and the Director of Sustainable Communities, in conjunction, as he mentioned, with myself and the Vice Chair and one other, which could be Councillor McCrory for that matter, that we approve the amendments to the response in the way that we've described. If we can respect the fact that officers have taken on board many of those comments, and where they are to be strengthened or added to, we would welcome that. So, Mr. Mayfield, I don't know whether you have some wording that you'd like to amend the recommendation to.
Off the top of my head, Chair, no, but we could have it somewhere along the lines that the formal consultation, the final formal consultation response be delegated to the Director of Sustainable Communities in consultation with the Chairman, Vice Chairman and one other member to finalise it and send it off before the 1st of July. Something along those lines. I can put that more formally in the minutes.
Okay, so are we happy with that, members?
Chair, I suggest that the opposition spokesmen are consulted in some way on the final response. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm happy to take that on board. Let's not make too much of a meal of it. I know that the officers have taken on board the thrust of all of the comments that have been made, and we will expect it to be strengthened in those respects. But I'm happy to that be passed by the opposition spokesperson as well, of course. So with those amendments, are we happy with that way forward?
Yes.
Agreed.
Thank you very much, and again, our thanks to the officers and to all of you for making some very constructive responses that have not been too localised and too detailed for this purpose. That's going to be in your consultation responses, one and all, isn't it? Very good. Okay, so we'll look forward to that, and our best wishes to Councillor Goldman. Sorry, Councillor Roberts, what are you saying?
Just make a quick bid to be the person from. I'm on the board. I'd love to be involved in the final consultation document process, if I could be.
Yeah, we'll sort out the details, I promise you.
Yes,
yeah.
I gather that. Thank you.
Thank you. And we wish Councillor Goldman all the best in her meeting that's coming up with them. I'm sure her arguments are even more well developed as a result.
Thank you very much for everybody's contribution.
So that brings us to agenda item 8, which is the annual report of the working groups, which I will introduce if I may. It's a year since we formed the policy board and began to work on the philosophy of having working groups looking at specific policy and strategy areas of the council. It's been an interesting year, hasn't it? I mean, we've learnt about the process as we're going along, and I do want to express my thanks to the members that have participated in the working groups and the officers that have approached this new initiative on the part of this administration so positively. And from my point of view, despite elections, despite the virus, despite all sorts of other things that have been going on during the course of the year, substantial progress has been made in various respects. I'm going to ask the chairs of each of the working groups very briefly if they want to add anything to the report which you all have. I'm going to take it slightly out of order because the items on affordable and social housing and homelessness and rough sleeping lead into the following item on the agenda. So I'll take those as the last of the working groups that will hear any elaboration that people want to make. So if I may start with waterways and pass to Councillor Lee if he has any comments that he'd like to make. No, perhaps he's left us. We'll try and come back to him. To the chair of the Health and Wellbeing Working Group is not with us tonight. We have Councillor Walsh and Councillor Willis. I don't know whether one or other of you would just like to highlight anything from this report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The report gives an excellent summary of the working group so far. We're set up last year to review the health and wellbeing plan, and have presented a strategy to Cabinet in November. There are 5 priorities set out for this year, and looking forward to the rest of this year, although the COVID-19 situation has had an impact of the work on the working group, it has supported identifying areas for the working group to focus on for the remainder of this year. More focus on initiatives which support the changing needs of residents and fit in with the priorities, particularly the impact of poverty and social isolation as a result of the current situation. And as we go back to a more normal lifestyle, the working group will be looking at opportunities to improve the health and well-being of residents, focusing on the priorities set out in the report, improving the health in adults and in particular in young people and children, with an increase in opportunities for physical activity. Another aspect, which is also a priority of the group, will be to look at the initiatives to alleviate the potential increased feeling of loneliness and isolation in both older and younger residents following the lockdown. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Walsh. I see that Councillor Willis, did you want to add to that at all? No, in which case,
I think that ground's been quite adequately covered by Councillor Walsh. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Willis. So I see that Councillor Moore has her hand up. Is that in relation to one of the groups in particular, Councillor Moore?
Thank you, Chair. It was just a point of detail regarding the introduction to the report. Well, we can come to that once you've finished your introduction. Thank you.
So, do we know if Councillor Lee is here, Mr. Mayfield, still? Meanwhile, if I could pass to Councillor Fuller to talk about the Local Democracy and Connectedness Working Group.
Thank you, Chair. As you may know, some of our councillors have been meeting to monitor the use and mobilisation of volunteers during the current COVID-19 pandemic, and it's pleasing to note just how many people have come forward to help out. With the Essex Welfare Service, over 2,600 volunteers have been recruited alongside 75 groups, including neighbourhood groups. So we really want to harness that enthusiasm and consider how we can retain these volunteers going forward and look for further opportunities for them. So it is proposed that the work from the task force will be incorporated into the Connectivity and Local Democracy Working Group alongside our existing work streams that deal with representation and participation. So we want to identify where there is a need for more volunteers. We want to gather good practice from existing providers and look to the training needs that will be needed going forward. But one particular area of focus we'd like to work on is how we can best use volunteers to support those who find themselves homeless, and that will be one thing that we'll be tackling straight away. So as a working group, we very much want to celebrate and encourage community spirit in our city, and we'll be very much working forward on that. Thank you. You're muted, Graham.
Oh, thank you. When we come to the proposal at the end of this, I will need a proposal that those two groups do merge. And the likely membership of it, not necessarily named, but just to formally create that merged group. So is there another member of the Waterways Working Group here who would like to comment on that? Otherwise, I will myself.
Chair, I'm happy to say a few words on Waterways. I would like to thank officers generally, actually, for their huge amount of contributions they've made to all of the working groups this year. It's a new initiative, and I think it's been warmly received, not just by councillors, but also the general public and the stakeholders that we've had the opportunity to engage with. As a result of our successful workshop on the 14th of February for Waterways, I do hope we could continue to invite people into the process, and I know that representatives from Chelmsford Canal Trust, for example, are very interested in continuing to hear more on our plans and our vision for Chelmsford's waterways. It was a very warmly received presentation also from Writtle University College students for their Sandford Mill proposals and landscape architecture-led designs. And the Essex Wildlife Trust contributed hugely in terms of the ecological benefits that we have around our river system in Chelmsford and indeed down to South Woodham. So I just wanted to say thank you again to officers, and we should all keep up the good work in the coming year.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. I think that's a general comment which we've learned during the course of the year, that workshops can be enormously powerful. The one that we held last August in the context of homelessness and rough sleeping was similarly productive in getting people to think about it and coming together under a more coordinated banner. And the Waterways Working Group workshop was very good. So as a principal way, one of the ways, not just one-to-one evidence taking from interested stakeholders, but getting them together to talk about the way in which the strategy needs to unfold and be documented, and the cooperation underlined. I think that's really, really helpful. So thank you for that. I know Councillor Lager is here, having been very patient during the meeting, I'm sure. I'd like to say a few words about the movement around the City Working Group.
Thank you, Chair. So as the youngest and most embryonic of the working groups under the Policy Board, and having somewhat had the wind taken out of our sails by the COVID pandemic, which is probably going to be a recurring theme in many of these reports, I imagine, there's not all that much to add in addition to what you see in the reports presented to you, other than to say that the enthusiasm and overall willingness to cooperate with other organisations, especially members of Essex County members and in particular officers of Essex County Council, has been overwhelming and very gratefully received. As you can see from the report, we've identified a number of different areas of focus. We're in the process of organising a series of workshops around these areas of focus and identifying and inviting stakeholders to participate. And as a result of this, we hope for a number of policies to be formed and to come out of the working groups, and very much looking forwards to getting stuck into it. Now we've got this new format of collaborative working happening for us with remote working and teams and meetings and such. Like I say, not too much to add at this stage, but certainly looking forward to the challenge ahead. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. So we'll come to the Affordable Housing Working Group. First of all, Councillor Soshin, you were chairing that.
Thank you, Chairman. I draw attention to the work so far in A, B and C. The Affordable House and Social Housing Working Group looked at what opportunities there were for quick action, and a number of sites were identified and presented to the Cabinet member and for funding, and that was brought forward in the budget. Unfortunately, again, as with COVID, the progress on that may be more difficult. It may throw up some more opportunities and so on, which the Cabinet will have to consider. And obviously the new working group will consider if there are any changes in the process that might be needed now, but also to look at a longer term solution to affordable and social housing. And I thank the officers for the work in particularly in the planning department in producing all those alternatives and producing all the backup papers. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Soshin. Now, Councillor Tron, who was chairing the Homelessness and Rough Sleeping Working Group for much of the year, went off to do something else. I can't remember quite what it was, Chloe, but it's very good to have you back. And this is Councillor Simon Goldman took over as the chair. So, Simon, do you want to say something about this item?
Thank you, Chair. Like all the other members, I just want to thank all of the officers that have been involved in these working groups. I'm not quite sure where they find all the time or whether or not they actually sleep, but their efforts have been really appreciated. I've been involved in a couple of the working groups, the housing with Councillor Soshin and, like you just say, the homelessness one. And both of them are really quite complicated and complex subjects. And what I've noticed is nothing is really that straightforward, and nothing really happens overnight because there's so much going on behind the scenes. But it has been it's been good working on both of those working groups, and I think now is the time which we've agreed that the groups come together so we can actually combine everything that we've learned over the last year. We've had one virtual meeting already so far, and I believe there's another one to be organised very soon. But we need to really look at the property needs of all the various individuals and families around our area, but we also need to look at the support needs. You know, we've really got to see how we can prevent some of these people becoming homeless. It's not just, most people regard homeless as just those people sleeping on the streets, and it's far greater than that. It's all the people that are sleeping on sofas, domestic abuse, and we've got to try and help all those people as much as we can. And I hope we can move things forward within the working group. I mean, the homelessness working group, last year we've managed to put together the homelessness and rough sleeper strategy together, which was agreed. But we need to try and get some of these ideas into actual, we need to get them out there and work with them now and get them into practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, I know that that Councillor Tron, who is the Deputy Cabinet Member with responsibility for housing, is with us. I don't know, Chloe, would you like to come in and join us at that point?
Thank you, Chair. Really to endorse everything that Councillor Goldman and Councillor Soshan have said. Certainly it feels the right time to bring the two groups together, because my primary focus initially was around the homelessness and rough sleeper working group, because I was chairing that for a period of time, although I was actively involved in the affordable housing working group. And it became very clear that the two are inextricably linked, and ultimately, as Councillor Goldman has already alluded to, in order for us to alleviate rough sleeping and homelessness within our city, we do need to look at housing strategy and how we're actually going to deliver that. So it's certainly the right time to bring the two groups together so that we can move forward, working with the officers in planning and working with the officers in the housing solutions team together to collaborate to actually drive forward now the priorities that are listed within the document that's been circulated. And I would also like to give my thanks for all of the officer time and effort. I appreciate that at times, we've been quite demanding, and rightly so, because this is a key area for us as an administration. But I really appreciate all of the effort and enthusiasm that we've seen, and I'm really looking forward to taking that forward as we move together in the single working group with the priority around housing strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tron. Now I have Councillor Moore. Did you want to come in at this stage? And then I have Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just a point of detail in the introduction, section C, just the wording in that line. The declaration of a climate and ecological emergency, if you'd be so kind as to amend that wording, just to include the full title of the declaration that we made, because that went through full council as that. Thank you.
Certainly, I'm sure we shall. Councillor Roberts.
Yes, I refer to the waterways working group. Southwood and Ferrers was mentioned, and I just really would like to see if anybody can give me an update at the moment about the rivers that surround Southwood, the river and the creeks that span three sides of Southwood and the country park, and it's, I can say that in this lockdown period, it's become a mecca of people who are crabbing, fishing, sailing, swimming, and we must have the largest swan population in Chelmsford now, because they're getting fed like mad on the River Crouch, and we've even found swans the other day were right up by the Burnham Road on the creek. So it is quite a big wildlife habitat, and obviously used, and it's getting more used by residents and people from around the area. And I wondered if there's anything going to happen or be discussed on that by the Waterways Working Group. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Can't hear you.
So I think somebody muted me. I've had to put it back on. Here we go. Anyway, yes, I know that it's been identified as a work stream within the Waterways Working Group as something that needs to be focused on. It's not been the specific subject of attention which you'd like it to be, and it's a good opportunity for me to just underline to all members, both of the policy board and outside the policy board, that even if you're not a formal member of a working group, your input to their deliberations is really welcome. And that's one of the lessons that we have learned from over the last year, that those working groups have been at their best when the discussions comprise people who have an interest in the subjects that are being discussed, not just confined to the people who are on the working group and officers supporting the working group. So I would encourage South Woodham to have its say at an early opportunity and bring the focus on the South Woodham waterways, which are, as you say, very important and very much part of what we want to see used and developed further. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to say that, and thank you for your comment. So what I'd like to propose, with the slight amendment that Councillor Moore asked we made to the title of the climate change emergency, that we note the report. It is also going, as I understand it, to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee next week, and that's going to be more of an opportunity for those members who wish to, on that committee and outside that committee, to review how the process itself has worked. From my perspective, it's been work in progress, and it's got better as the year has gone by, and the fact that the MAC working group has got off to a flying start, I think has been because it's learned from the way that other working groups have formed and performed. So with that change, I would like to suggest that we do note the report with all the thanks that go with it, and then move on to the next item, which is about the terms of reference to the housing group. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. So you've heard Councillor Goldman talk and Councillor Tron talking about the reasons behind the merging of the two housing related working groups. It certainly feels the right time to do that. There will be work streams within that combined group which will carry forward some of the specifics that have come up from both of the groups up to now. But it's also driven by the fact that there is a need to bring both groups and other aspects of housing needs generally, into a coherent housing strategy that covers all aspects of housing, not just affordable housing and not just housing and support for the otherwise homeless or threatened with homeless. So the terms of reference are as you see them. The suggestion, as you'll see elsewhere in the report, from the point of view of the administration group, we are very serious about engaging with the widest variety of members that we can in the working group process. So we've come to the conclusion that cabinet members and deputies don't necessarily need to be formally part of the working group, that they would want to attend and will be just as much part of deliberations as anyone else. So the combined working group, from our point of view, would be Councillor Goldman, Councillor Soshin and Councillor Shaw. I assume from the Conservative point of view it would be Councillor Poulter. I'm not quite clear yet who the independent would like to formally nominate, but as I say, it is open to all sorts of other members to participate in the deliberations as they move forward. So I'd like to add that as a proposal to the terms of reference that we're coming to next. So one final thing then, as far as the agenda item on the annual report of the working groups, is to formally propose, or formally note or propose, I'm not quite sure which Mr Mayfield will tell us we should do, that the Local Democracy Connected working group combines itself with the Community Engagement Task Force that has been operating. Talking to Councillor Whitehead about this, he is suggesting that both Councillor Steele and himself would like to be on that. So that suggests a total working group size of 7 rather than 5. And we can finalise that in due course if that's acceptable to you. But that's the proposal, that the merger takes place with a membership of 7. Can I have a proposer and seconder for that, please?
Proposed. Councillor Fuller.
Seconded, Simon Goldman.
Thank you very much. And we'll take things forward from there. Okay, so that concludes that agenda item, and the next agenda item we've touched on is the specific suggestion for the terms of reference of the merged group, which are as they're laid out in the report, which carry forward the items from the previous 2 working groups and add the overall need to produce a housing strategy, overarching housing strategy from the Chelmsford Council and its stakeholders. So can I have a proposer and seconder for that, please, or comments? I haven't got any comments coming up here yet.
Proposed, Councillor Fuller.
Seconded, Councillor Goldman.
Thank you very much. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Take that as yes. And so we come to the final item on the agenda. There are no items here which need to be relayed to Cabinet for decision, as you'll have seen. So the question, I've not been notified of any other urgent business. It needs to be very specific to our terms of reference as a policy board. Does anyone have anything that they wish to raise as an urgent matter?
Chairman,
in which case,
Chairman, we've got item 10, the work programme.
Oh, goodness me. Thank you very much, Councillor Sochin. It slipped off the bottom.
Have a question on that, Chairman, if it's the right time to... Yeah,
no, my mistake. I do apologise. And very important item it is. It slipped off the bottom of my screen here. So yes, the work programme has obviously been affected by COVID-19. Some things have been delayed. Other things have come to the surface as being particularly urgent. And the work programme there will be fluid, as it always is, in terms of the specific things that come up from the working groups as time goes by. But I would like to take this opportunity to ask Mr. Potter to update us on the status of the master plans. We agreed a process for that, if you remember, which was recommended to Cabinet and agreed last year. And we're now at the stage of a number of the master plans approaching the next stage of their development. And perhaps councillors would like to hear from Mr. Potter how those are progressing.
Thank you, Chair. Well, the work programme, as you can see, we've got a busy couple of months ahead of us in relation to a number of quite significant work streams. The master plans are one of those, and a number of those are being undertaken at the moment and are on the work programme. So the three that I just wanted to bring to members' attention are the ones that are probably the ones that are progressing most quickly. First one is the West Chelmsford site, which is Warren Farm. So members will recall that stakeholder and public consultation was undertaken on this site in 2018 and then went into 2019. There was a period of time last year when the developer was reassessing the site and essentially taking on board those consultation responses. So because there has been some added detail and some changes that we feel are warrant a reconsultation, then we will be starting a public reconsultation on that tomorrow. In fact, so the starting date for that is tomorrow. So letters will go out, notifications, leaflets, social media posts, all of the things that we're trying to do, especially in the times where people are, because of the COVID pandemic, we are needing to be much more proactive with our consultation. So that's starting tomorrow, and that's programmed to come back to Policy Board on the 16th at this next meeting, in fact. But there will be a members' presentation before that. So that's West Chelmsford. North of Broomfield, stakeholder and public consultation took place last year. Not as many changes, pretty minor tweaks to that proposal. So therefore, that is heading towards the same route, Policy Board on the 16th for consideration, ahead of both needing to go to Cabinet. All the master plans need to go to Cabinet, as you are no doubt aware. The third one, Southwood and Ferrers. So stakeholder, that's running slightly behind. So stakeholder consultation took place at the beginning of this year, just before essentially the lockdown. But we are now working with the developer in relation to undertaking the first public consultation later this month, in fact. And the developer who is taking on board many of our suggestions in relation to virtual, how that can be done in a virtual setting. So that is likely to be coming out, as I said, later in in June, and that would then, it's not on the work programme, but it will need to be on the work programme. That is likely then to be coming to the 1st of October's policy board. That'll be the programme then. So they're the three main larger sites that are all under work at the moment. I think also I'd just like to point out, just remind members, and I know many members have accepted this, but we are running a members briefing on this, an introduction to master planning members briefing on Monday the 15th of June, and very much like to looking forward to seeing many of you there in relation to officers providing an introductory background and context to master planning, because obviously that is going to be a really important part of the work streams that are coming before this board and cabinet, and to inform future planning applications and to implement our local plan. Thank you very much, Chair.
Did you also want to say a couple of words about Manor Farm and the other Great Baddow sites?
Manor Farm, yes, that is that is approaching that's had stakeholder consultation. That is approaching a public consultation. I don't have a firm date on that, but that is probably running probably in the same region as Southwood and Ferrers. So I would expect that to be coming back around about the same time. So as you can see, we've got a fair bit on our plate at the moment in terms of master planning all of these pretty strategic sites. So I think you're right in the sense that the timetable sometimes may change and may be slightly fluid because of external factors, that such as making sure that we're happy with the consultation that's happening, and making sure that we satisfied that the virtual consultation, because this is new to us, is going to do exactly what we want it to do. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I have Councillor Soshin.
Yeah, on the master plan, Chairman, and I listened to the cabinet meeting, and the SPDs are going out for consultation, but I don't see it being possible to bring those back to the July the 16th meeting, although perhaps Mr. Potter could clarify that, and maybe there might need to be a meeting between the July the 16th and October the 1st to handle that. Perhaps you could comment on that, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Potter?
Yeah, the SPDs, Councillor Soshin's completely right. I mean, we were hoping to go out on consultation, probably would have finished the consultation by now, if we hadn't have had the, obviously the pandemic that we're all facing. So the 16th on agenda item 10, the SPDs aren't going back to the 16th of July's meeting. So they are going back to the 1st of October. That's where they're on the work programme at the moment. So we are hopeful that there will be an opportunity to undertake the consultation between now and that point to enable us to come back to policy board with the consultation feedback and officers' recommendations on how those supplementary planning documents can change and progress towards an approval. Thank you.
Yeah, and we did speak, Mr. Potter, about that delay because of the juxtaposition of policy board meetings versus cabinet meetings. And so, but you can assure us, can you, that there aren't negative implications for delaying the actual adoption of those SPDs?
I think obviously we want to get them adopted as quickly as we can. I think we need to make sure that the consultation that we undertake on them is meaningful, and we have time to analyse the representations and then make changes to the document and then bring it forward to you. So I think the timescale there is an effective timescale to enable us to do that.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, if I could take this opportunity just to welcome the work session that you mentioned on the 15th of June about the master planning process, and encourage policy board members and others to go to that if you possibly can. I think it's a good example of where we do our own jobs better if we have that underlying briefing and underlying sense of how the process works. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And I just wanted to underline that the process that Mr. Potter has outlined in respect of those individual cases very much reflects this administration's determination that the master planning process, and indeed the process in respect of smaller sites to the relevant extent, that the master planning process genuinely does provide the meaningful opportunity for local members and local groups and parish councils and the public to engage in the master planning process with their ideas and concerns at the appropriate stage. And I'm quite sure that although that adds to a certain extent, it adds to the time and effort that is needed to get these right, I'm sure that the end product will be the better because of it. So I'm looking forward to that. So thank you again. The planning department is rightly getting lots of plaudits tonight. Lots of work to be done. So, Mr. Potter, I have your hand up again.
No, it was, sorry, Chair, it was just to make sure that there's a stray bit of text. So Councillor Sosin is completely right. So under the 16th of July, it says in italics to consider changes to the 3 SPDs following consultation. That should be removed. So we'll remove that from the work programme and remove that, put that text down to where it belongs down on the 1st of October. So apologies for that.
Okay, thank you for that. So I can now, this time appropriately, move to see if there's any other business that people wish to raise, urgent business at this stage. In which case, I would like to thank you all very much, members and officers alike, and Mr. Parker in his absence. Now, I think, and look forward to the working groups getting seriously underway for the 2nd year of their operation. So have the rest of your evening, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.